Welcome to Business Legal Lifecycle TV, the live TV show all about the legal aspects of your business to help educate you on complex legal terms in an easy to understand manner, to help understand why you need to do certain things in your business from a legal point of view, and to help you develop a plan for the future. Our mission at Business Legal Lifecycle is to help empower all small to medium-sized businesses around the world to get access to legal advice so that they can help build their communities and make the world a better place. Did you know that any business owner is on average 7 months away from losing everything? That is the average time it takes from a successful business to fold when an aspect of their business is not set up correctly. Have you ever wanted to get legal advice but didn't understand what was going on? Do you feel like there is a divide between lawyers and their clients? Then this TV show is for you. It is all about empowering you and your business with the knowledge and tools to ensure that this doesn't happen to you. Business Legal Lifecycle TV delivers a twice-weekly show focusing on the legal aspects of your business. At lunchtime on Mondays, we present Fast Fix Monday, a quick 5 to 10 minute show that will give you some actionable steps to consider for the week for your business. And at lunchtime on Wednesdays, we present our in-depth show of between 30 minutes and an hour, where we go through complicated legal aspects of your business in a simple to understand, plain English manner. And whether that is through educational pieces or interviews with experts in their fields. Hi everyone, and welcome to our monthly legal updater. My name's Jeremy Stretton, and with me is Craig Mason.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us.
And this is the show, this is the second one we've done, and this is been recorded in December 2017. So if you are listening to this on a replay, whether on our podcast or on the Facebook Live TV show, YouTube channels, Periscope, wherever you might see us or reading our articles. This is a December 2017 legal updater for basically the laws that have changed. So we did delay slightly this month. So normally we do it on the first Friday of each month. But we didn't do it this month because we're based in Queensland, and in late November, Queensland had a state election. And so we wanted to see who actually came out on top of that election, and then have a quick chat around some of the key policies that you may or may not have been aware of, so that you know what they are. So just to be very clear, this is not a political show, so we're not making any comment about any policy from any side of government. We're just talking about the facts of what was in the party platforms. And what was also in the news that was reported over the month before the election, so that you're aware of what the changes actually mean. So Craig, before I dive into that part of the show, is there anything that you wanted to say?
No, I don't think so. I think let's start with the first one.
Yeah, okay, great.
Election.
So yeah, as of today, the election hasn't actually been decided, but it's pretty clear that the Labor government, will continue and will form government going into the next 3 years in Queensland. So I had a look through their state platform that they published before the election, and also had a quick look at the news that was around. I pulled out 6 things that I thought were interesting that people should be aware of that may change. And as part of this show, we'll actually give you an update when they do change. But for anyone who's not aware of Queensland politics, we have what we call a unicameral legislature, which means we have one Parliament House, so one House of Parliament. And that means that if the party that's in power wants to pass some legislation, it's pretty certain that it'll get through, which has been a controversial part of our politics for a long time. But other states in Australia have bicameral legislature, so they have a Senate as well. So the 6 changes that came through were an increase by 3% of the transfer duty surcharge for foreign buyers to 7%. So what does that mean? Well, if you're a foreign buyer, so not a resident of Queensland or Australia, and you're buying property in Queensland, you have to pay transfer duty of 7% on top of the normal stamp duty, which is a progressive scale. It goes up from one rate to another based on how much you're actually spending. But if you're buying a property and you're not an Australian resident, then you've got to add 7% onto the cost of buying by way of transfer duty. So that obviously hasn't been legislated yet, but it's part of their platform. If you've got a property that's worth more than $10 million, then land tax will be levied on 2.25% of that value for individuals and 2.5% for other entities, so trusts, companies, partnerships, that all that kind of information, so long as the property is not the PPR. So that's an increase on the current rates and is a flat rate on all properties that are over $10 million. So if you do have properties worth over $10 million, then you need to be aware of those additional costs, because that's land tax, if you're not aware, is a tax that's levied on the amount of property that you own as at midnight on the 1st of July each year. So as the financial year rolls over, the government works out what the value of the properties are based on the land valuation, and they charge a tax based on that. So that's a cost you need to be aware of. The next change is new cars worth more than $100,000 will have a 2% increase in the duty that's paid on those. So if you're buying an expensive car, then great, but you just need to be aware that you're going to be paying an extra 2% in the duty on that vehicle. There's also, in the party platform, there are extensive industrial relations changes. So industrial relations relates to the laws that govern how employers and employees interact. I'm not going to go through each of them because we're talking many pages. So there's extensive industrial relation changes that have been proposed and that the Labor Party will bring through. Probably the main thing to understand is that they're aiming to re-establish the collective bargaining and enterprise agreements in a more secure way than what they are now. So that'll be interesting to see. As those changes come through, we will update people in our monthly show, but be aware that there are going to be extensive industrial relations changes. They also intend to introduce legislation to prevent the use of drones and tracking devices by employers against employees. So probably not applicable for most people who would watch this show, most small to medium-sized businesses, but larger businesses might think about using drones to monitor what employees are doing on a daily basis. Especially if they're not around to be able to monitor that. So part of their platform was to prevent drone use and tracking devices against from employers to employees, which is an interesting change and interesting to see how much of a problem that actually is. And the last one that I thought was noteworthy was in their policy platform, and it wasn't talked about very much, but they did talk about bringing in legislation for voluntary assisted dying. So obviously we're in December 2017. The law has been changed in Victoria as of 2019. And it's probably the strictest legislation in the world to assist voluntary dying for people. And I'm not going to go into the details of it, but that is a policy platform that the Labor Party has talked about being something that they're going to bring into Queensland. So they're the top 6 changes. As I said, this is just a snippet. And as we go through in the monthly legal updaters in the future, as we progress through the Business Legal Lifecycle TV show, we'll talk about each of those as they come in so that you're aware of the changes. And when they're announced, we'll also bring them up to your attention so that you know that those laws are changing. So I know that's a bit long for what we normally do, but we thought it was important that we talk about those changes because they are things that are going to come in Queensland over the next 3 years. So Craig, do you want to get on to the second topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And just with that, obviously watch this space with the Queensland election and also with the assisted dying. There was a recent case that was handed down this morning, which we'll probably include in the January update. That be interesting to read through that and consider what the changes might be and how that might have affected that case that was handed down in the Queensland Supreme Court late yesterday. So watch that space. All right, so the second one that's come up recently was prenuptial agreements, and there was a recent one overruled by the High Court. So prenuptial agreements are binding financial agreements, and they're entered into pre-relationship or pre-marriage. They can be entered in during the relationship, and it governs what happens if there's a separation or on death. So in early November 2017, the High Court ruled that a fiance of a property developer who also happened to be a millionaire, which normally when these things have been decided, there's lots of money at stake. They signed a prenuptial agreement, and the High Court's ruled or overturned it on the basis of undue influence. So in the particular case, the fiance or the wife was from an Eastern European country, and she was given the agreement a couple of days before the actual wedding. She did seek some advice and was advised not to sign the agreement by her lawyer. However, she was told by her future husband that if she didn't sign it, then the wedding would be, not going ahead. She considered that, thought all the guests are invited, everyone's rolling into the reception. She had family coming in from overseas, etc., and felt that she didn't have any choice other than to sign it because of the fact that she was going to be essentially embarrassed and all those sorts of things about what was happening with the marriage. So she signed it. The agreement essentially left her with $50,000 cash, an apartment and a car. So the wife sought to overturn the agreement, as I said, and the High Court ruled that it would be overturned. Now, these agreements have always been pretty problematic. A lot of people won't do them. There's a lot of risk involved. And with anything, you need to be careful. Fair. It's got to be fair and reasonable. And obviously, if there's undue influence and those sorts of things, then they're liable to be set aside. So what the High Court has said, essentially, even if you reject your legal advice and then sign it, you can still later down the track be successful in having it set aside, which is probably the most important distinction out of it, that you've sought the advice was not to sign it, you've disregarded that and continued on and signed it. Obviously, at that point, you could have backed out on it on the basis of legal advice, but you didn't. But you can still have it set aside based on the High Court's decision in November 2017. So, yeah, pretty problematic area, and it's probably become more problematic based on that decision. So I think there'll be a few more of these. Jeremy?
Yeah, absolutely. So the third one is some new building and safety laws have come into effect. So this commenced on the 1st of November 2017 and are designed to improve the safety of people at work sites and building sites around Queensland. Basically, what the law has been changed to do is to place a responsibility on anyone on a building site to report an unsafe situation. So the idea here is to prevent the manufacture, distribution and use of non-conforming building products and for unsafe practices. So what they're looking at doing is basically saying, if you're on a building site and you notice that something's unsafe, then you need to be proactive about it. If that occurs and you're unsure, then you need to contact the QBCC. They can issue recall notices for building products. They can give warning statements to raise public awareness, and they can actually prosecute offences relating to supplying or installing those non-conforming building products. And this legislation's come about based on unsafe building practices around the world and that tragic fire in the UK. So if you're aware of unsafe building practices, then you need to be proactive about it and actually notify someone. Otherwise, you can actually be fined and get into a lot of trouble. Craig.
Yeah, excellent. All right, so number 4 for this month, there was a recent case and a sentence regarding a Brisbane-based financial planner / fraudster. He admitted to more than 24 fraud charges and the misuse of some $10 million in clients' funds, mainly self-managed super fund investments. So he was recently jailed for the disgraceful conduct that he was doing. He was using the money, the $10 million, to invest in related businesses, but he didn't necessarily personally benefit from the fraud. And unfortunately for the victims, more than, I think, about $8 million remains unrecovered. So, it's pretty disgraceful. The sentence was 12 months concurrently for the charges, and obviously you give your money to a financial planner to invest, and then when these sorts of things happen, it's pretty bad. But with anything, there are problem people in any industry, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's bad within the financial planning industry. And the law is there to obviously protect people, and that's what's happened in this instance in terms of getting their money back. That depending on how the structure is, there might be ways of getting it back, but it'll take a little bit more time. But it's not something, there's always some bad eggs in any industry, and the same with legal or accounting or financial planning or whatever it might be. So we don't need to necessarily target particular industries and come down and introduce these wonderful pieces of legislation to stop all these sorts of things, because it doesn't happen very often. And in this instance, the person is going to jail, which seems like a pretty big deterrent to me. So that was the recent Brisbane fraudster. Jeremy, the next one.
Yeah, excellent. So the next one is about Bitcoin. So anyone who has been following the news, the financial news recently, will know that Bitcoin has increased in value by like 1,000% or something in the last year. And it's got a lot of people worried because as it gets more valuable and it's not regulated, a lot of governments are worried about how it might be used for proceeds of crime or by illegal activities. So federal laws are being introduced in Australia to give AUSTRAC the new powers to police digital currency exchanges. So what does that mean? Basically, it means that AUSTRAC, who monitor the flow of money in Australia and who you have to report certain sums of cash that you find out about to basically stop illegal activity, now will have powers over these digital currency Bitcoin exchanges. So essentially what it will require is that the exchanges to be registered under the regime, even if they're not based in Australia. And they'll need to maintain and implement systems to keep track of the money so that basically AUSTRAC can keep track of where the money's going to and from. So obviously that's going to be problematic for those exchanges because they've been built around the idea that that everything's decentralized and there's no particular record. But governments around the world are getting very concerned about, as it rises in value, as it becomes much more valuable than it ever was, how that will be used. And the industry does think the legislation is too harsh, but I suppose the Australian government is trying to find a happy middle ground where they can still monitor illegal activity, make sure that this new Bitcoin craze isn't being used to get around the costs and the laws that try and prevent people from using money for the wrong thing, but it's an interesting balance. So it'll be interesting to see when the legislation is passed and how the industry actually uses it to basically protect people going forward. So yeah, that's an interesting one, and it'll be interesting to see where it actually goes. Craig, next one.
Yeah, so the next few that we want to talk about involves the ACCC. So they've had a pretty busy last couple of months, which is good, I guess, that they're getting out there and investigating some companies. So there was some recent, this one involves Ashley and Martin. There was recent changes about unfair contract provisions about 12 months ago, and it's starting to come through, and prosecutions have been had and cases are now being determined about what might be unfair in contracts. So in late November 2017, the ACCC announced that they were investigating Ashley and Martin regarding these unfair contract terms. Essentially, in the contracts for Ashley and Martin, they require users to opt out of their treatment within 2 days after receiving their medical advice report. And if they don't do that, then they're charged the full fee. So the ACCC obviously is concerned that 2 days is not enough time to consider all of their options. It's an expensive process, etc., etc. So it does require, some serious thought, discussion, etc., etc. And that 2 days seems to be, from the ACCC's point of view, to be unfair. And so that's why they've commenced proceedings in the federal court regarding the contracts. And they're seeking from the court a decision about some of the terms, whether they're unfair or not. And if they're deemed to be unfair, then Ashley Martin obviously can't rely on those, and they'll have all sorts of issues about things in the past and their contracts at the moment. And striking out clauses might mean that their whole agreement is invalid. So yeah, you need to make sure when you're entering into these contracts or drafting these contracts that everything's fair and reasonable. It's not supposed to just be one-sided. The whole point of it is to govern the the transaction between the parties, so it's supposed to be fair for everyone. And you can't just automatically assume that people who agree to these terms, that the ACCC can come in later and look at these things. So yeah, pretty straightforward. Everything needs to be fair and reasonable, and it's going to become more of an issue as the ACCC investigates more companies. So next one, Jeremy, the ACCC's at it again with someone else.
Yeah, or just before we move on to that one, I just wanted to say that I think that people who are regulars to our show should listen to this month, because this month's theme is initial clients, and we are going to talk about these kind of clauses and the new legislation and what it means for people, especially when they're engaging with clients with standard terms and conditions. So watch this space and make sure you come back and join us each week so that we can have a chat around what is unfair and how that legislation is expanding and how it's going to be used. So, as Craig said, the ACCC has been at it again, and this time is to do with the franchisor, Fastaway Couriers in Perth. And they've been fined just under $10,000 for failing to comply with the franchising code of conduct. And I think this is very relevant. This month and this quarter, we've been talking to our accountant partnerships about franchisees. And this is really important, because what it shows is that if a franchisor fails to comply with the franchising code of conduct, the ACCC does actually go after them. So basically, in the franchising code of conduct, there's a disclosure statement. The disclosure statement sets out that a franchisor has to provide details of existing franchisees as well as former franchisees that have terminated or transferred their franchise agreement. And Fastaway Couriers in Perth weren't doing this, according to the ACCC. So it's really important that you know that this information is there, and that you've got to provide it, and you've got to pay really close attention to what information is required. And if you don't, and you have a problematic franchisee, or you have the ACCC come knocking on your door, you can actually be found out and given quite a substantial fine. In any business, $10,000 is a lot of money, so you want to try and avoid that as much as possible. Craig, do you want to go through the last one?
Yeah, so ACCC recently penalised finder.com.au, which is a health insurance comparison website. They were fined a penalty of $10,800 for misleading consumers about the number of policies they compare. So on their site, it said it compared roughly 65,000 policies, but it turns out the actual number is substantially less than that. So the fine for $10,800 was for breach of the Australian consumer law. Finder.com.au have since removed the representation based on that, and it's obvious that consumers rely on these sorts of platforms at the moment, the comparison ones, to inform their choice of the insurance provider. And when they see something that's 65,000, and they're it's obviously a misrepresentation, and they may rely on that and use that website instead of another one. So I guess, what does it all mean? You need to be careful about what claims you make on the internet. Make sure it's backed up with actual hard, facts or evidence. Don't make outlandish comments about 65,000 policies when it's substantially less than that. Because ACCC, as we've said, are investigating, and they'll trawl through all these sorts of things, and you could get a fine of $10,800 or something more or less than that. So yeah, if you're going to make claims on the internet, make sure you're able to back them up with some form of actual evidence. So pretty common sense, I would say. But finder.com.au, sorry, pretty big sort of business, and they've fallen foul of the Australian consumer law. So one to be careful of. The last one.
Yeah, I'll do the last one if you like. So the last one is an international one. There wasn't much that we could find that was terribly interesting internationally, but this one was an interesting one about an Australian man who's facing jail time in Bali for stealing sunglasses. So the allegation is that he was at a duty-free shop at the international departure terminal, and that he stole sunglasses, or that designer label sunglasses from that shop. And Bali prosecutors have demanded 6 months jail for him. He's already spent 3 months in jail already for stealing sunglasses. And I think the reason that we wanted to include this one is, if you're travelling overseas, you've got to be really aware of the laws. Whereas stealing some sunglasses in an Australian duty-free shop is still a serious offence, you're probably not going to go to jail for it, or if you are, not for very long. But in other countries, they do have other laws that are quite we could see them as quite harsh. And so if you are travelling abroad, make sure that you're complying with the laws. Make sure that you read up. Stealing's obviously clear that you're not supposed to do that in any country around the world. But if you're not sure, make sure you find out about them so that you're not stealing stuff, you're not breaking the law, because the punishments can be very harsh. And there's nothing really the Australian government can do to help you. If you break the law overseas, well, that's your own silly fault. So, in this case, for stealing some designer sunglasses, he's facing up to 6 months in jail, and he's already spent 3 months. So by the time it actually gets decided, it's probably going to come that long. So be careful when you're overseas, and not steal stuff, but not break the law. So I think that's it for our legal update show. Craig, do you want to conclude it all?
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Don't steal stuff. All right. So thanks for joining us. We'll be back next month with more legal updates. So in January 2018, and we'll be back again on Monday for Fast Fix Monday, where, as Jeremy said before, this theme for December is initial clients. So we'll be talking more about initial clients. And what legal aspects you need to be aware of. So please join us on Monday for Fast Fix Monday. If you've got any feedback about this particular legal update show, then please let us know via email or Facebook or wherever you want to make a comment, because we'd love some feedback to make sure that people are getting some value out of the legal update show. So, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you again on Monday.
Bye.